I stood frozen in my own kitchen, listening to my son's wife whisper to him in the next room. Her words cut through me like a knife. "Your mom's house is worth $900K. Let's put her in a home." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I took a deep breath, walked into that room with a smile and said, "What a wonderful idea." Then I made one phone call that changed everything. Before we start, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect life. Well, as perfect as life can be after losing the love of your existence. My husband Robert passed away 5 years ago after a brutal fight with cancer. 42 years of marriage, gone in 18 months of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and watching the strongest man I ever knew waste away to nothing. I held his hand when he took his last breath in our bedroom, the same bedroom where we'd laughed, fought, made love, and built our dreams together. Robert and I bought this house 35 years ago when it was just a modest 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet Connecticut suburb. We were young, broke, and so deeply in love it hurt. I was a second-grade teacher making barely enough to cover groceries. Robert worked construction, coming home every night with dirt under his fingernails and stories that made me laugh until I cried. Together we scraped and saved every penny. We planted the rose garden in the backyard with our bare hands. We renovated the kitchen ourselves, arguing over cabinet colors and laughing when we got more paint on each other than on the walls. We built this home with sweat, sacrifice, and so much love. This house raised our son David. Every corner holds a memory. There's the dent in the hallway wall from when David learned to ride his bike indoors during a rainstorm. The height marks on the door frame tracking his growth from age 3 to 18. The window seat where I read him bedtime stories every single night. The backyard where Robert taught him to throw a baseball and where we hosted his high school graduation party. This isn't just a house. It's the physical embodiment of everything Robert and I worked for, everything we were. I spent 40 years shaping young minds as a teacher, retiring 5 years ago with a modest pension. I'm not wealthy, but I'm comfortable. I have my Social Security, Robert's life insurance policy, and this house that's now worth $900,000 because the neighborhood became desirable. I never remarried. How could I? Robert was my soulmate, my partner, my best friend. Instead, I poured all my love into my family, especially my son David and his family. I helped pay for David's college education when student loans would have buried him in debt. I gave him $50,000 3 years ago to start his own consulting business when no bank would give him a loan. When his wife Jessica gave birth to their 2 children, Emma and Lucas, I was there in the delivery room holding her hand and crying tears of joy. I babysit every Tuesday and Thursday so they can save on childcare costs. Every Sunday, I cook elaborate dinners for the whole family. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, homemade apple pie, the works. I knit sweaters for the grandkids every Christmas. I'm the grandmother who never says no, the mother who always shows up, the widow who found purpose in loving her family with everything she has left. I thought they loved me back. I really did. I thought I was building memories and strengthening bonds. I thought family meant something. I was so naive, so trusting, so blind to what was really happening in my own home. Before everything fell apart, my life had a beautiful rhythm to it, a peaceful, predictable pattern that brought me comfort in the years since Robert passed. I'd wake up every morning at 6:30. Just as the sun started filtering through the lace curtains Robert's mother gave us as a wedding gift. I'd make myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Robert used to sneak up behind me and wrap his arms around my waist while I cooked breakfast. The house would be quiet except for the birds singing outside and the gentle hum of the old refrigerator we'd had for 20 years. My mornings belonged to the garden. I'd slip on my gardening gloves and spend an hour tending to the roses Robert planted for our 30th anniversary. Red roses, my favorite. He'd said they reminded him of my lipstick on our first date. Even now, 5 years after his death, those roses bloom every spring like clockwork. I talk to them sometimes. Talk to Robert, really. Tell him about my day, about the grandkids, about how much I miss him. The neighbors probably think I'm crazy, but I don't care. It brings me peace. Tuesdays were library days. I'd been volunteering at the Riverside Public Library for 3 years, helping kids with reading programs and organizing book clubs for seniors. Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, always saved the new mystery novels for me. We'd have tea during my break and gossip about the town council meetings. Those Tuesdays made me feel useful, like I still had something to contribute to the world beyond just being a grandmother. But the best days were Sundays. Every single Sunday for the past 3 years, David would bring Jessica and the kids over for dinner. I'd start cooking at noon, preparing all of David's childhood favorites: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the recipe my own mother taught me, fresh bread rolls that filled the house with that warm, yeasty smell, green bean casserole, and for dessert, my famous apple pie with vanilla ice cream. They'd arrive around 4 o'clock. Emma and Lucas would burst through the door screaming, "Grandma," and tackle me with hugs. My heart would nearly explode with joy every single time. We'd play in the backyard before dinner. I'd push them on the tire swing. Robert hung from the old oak tree decades ago. Lucas loved when I'd pretend to be a dragon and chase him around the garden. Emma preferred sitting with me on the porch, showing me her drawings and telling me elaborate stories about her imaginary friends. During dinner, we'd all crowd around the dining room table, the same table where David did his homework as a child. I'd watch my family eat the food I prepared with love, and I'd feel complete. David would tell me about his consulting business, how clients were coming in, how things were growing. Jessica would talk about her job as a medical office administrator, complaining about difficult doctors and insurance paperwork. I'd listen to everything, offering advice when asked, mostly just feeling grateful to have them all here in this house, together. After dinner, David would help me wash dishes while Jessica got the kids ready to leave. We'd stand side by side at the sink, just like when he was a teenager, and he'd tell me things he wouldn't say in front of Jessica. His worries, his dreams, his fears about being a good father. I thought those were our special moments, our bond, mother and son, honest and close. I thought I knew my life. I thought I knew my family. I thought Sundays would last forever. I had no idea that behind those smiles and thank yous, a plan was forming. A plan that would tear apart everything I held sacred. It started 3 weeks ago on a Sunday that seemed like any other. The pot roast was in the oven, filling the house with that rich, savory aroma. Emma and Lucas were playing in the living room with the wooden blocks Robert had carved by hand when David was a boy. I was in the kitchen preparing the green beans when I heard lowered voices coming from the dining room. I paused, my hand still holding the colander. Something about the tone made me stop. It wasn't the normal chatter of a married couple. It was hushed, secretive, urgent. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked quietly toward the doorway. I wasn't trying to sneak. I just didn't want to interrupt if they were having a private moment. But what I saw made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Jessica and David were standing near the bay window, their heads close together. Jessica's perfectly manicured finger was pointing upward, tracing along the crown molding that Robert and I had installed ourselves 30 years ago. Then her hand swept across, gesturing at the original hardwood floors we'd refinished 3 times over the decades. Her lips were moving rapidly, whispering something I couldn't quite hear, but her eyes were calculating, assessing, measuring. She was looking at my home the way a jeweler examines a diamond. David's face was tense, conflicted. He kept glancing toward the kitchen, toward me, then back at Jessica. He nodded slowly, uncomfortably, like someone being convinced of something they weren't entirely sure about. I must have made a sound because they both whipped around. Jessica's expression transformed instantly into that bright, pageant-perfect smile she always wore. "Margaret, We were just admiring your beautiful craftsmanship. They really don't make houses like this anymore, do they? No, I said slowly, searching their faces. No, they don't. David wouldn't meet my eyes. He cleared his throat and said something about checking on the kids, then practically fled the room. Jessica followed, still chattering about how lovely the woodwork was, how classic, how valuable these old features had become. I stood there alone, a strange chill running down my spine, despite the warmth from the oven. Something felt off, wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. The feeling lingered through dinner, though I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being silly, reading too much into nothing. But then, 4 days later, I found something that made that chill return with a vengeance. I was cleaning the guest bathroom, the one Jessica always used when she visited. She'd been over just the day before for an impromptu visit, saying she needed to drop off some hand-me-down clothes for the church donation box I kept. As I emptied the small trash can beside the toilet, something glossy caught my eye. A magazine, Real Estate Luxury Monthly. I pulled it out, confused. I didn't subscribe to this. The pages fell open and my heart skipped. Sticky notes, bright pink sticky notes marking specific pages. Luxury condos in downtown Hartford, investment properties in Florida, vacation homes in the Berkshires, all with price tags in the hundreds of thousands. Jessica's handwriting was on the sticky notes. Possible? Nice ROI. After sale? After what sale? I sat down on the closed toilet lid, the magazine trembling in my hands. Young couples browse real estate all the time, I told myself. They dream, they plan for the future. This doesn't mean anything, but why was it hidden in my trash? Why the secretive whispering? Why had David looked so guilty? A small voice in the back of my mind whispered danger, but I pushed it down. I was being paranoid, crazy, a lonely old widow imagining conspiracies because I'd watched too many true crime shows. I carefully placed the magazine back in the trash, exactly as I'd found it. But that night, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop wondering what they were really planning. I spent the next week trying desperately to convince myself I was losing my mind. Every morning, I'd wake up and give myself stern lectures while making coffee. "Margaret Ann Porter, you're being absolutely ridiculous," I'd say to my reflection in the bathroom mirror. "That woman is your daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandchildren. She's not plotting against you. She's just interested in real estate. Lots of young people are." I folded laundry in the guest room and rationalized every suspicious moment. The whispering, married couples whisper. It's intimate. It's normal. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. My birthday was coming up in 2 months. Maybe they were discussing a gift, a party, something sweet and thoughtful. The real estate magazine? Jessica worked in medical administration, but that didn't mean she couldn't have other interests. Maybe she and David were thinking about upgrading their own home. Their house was small, after all, barely 1,500 square feet. With 2 growing kids, they probably needed more space. I convinced myself the sticky notes meant they were window shopping for themselves, dreaming the way Robert and I used to dream when we were young and broke. We'd spent countless Sunday afternoons driving through wealthy neighborhoods, pointing at houses we'd never afford, imagining what our lives might look like if we won the lottery. It was harmless fantasy. That's all Jessica was doing. "You're just lonely," I told myself while dusting Robert's photo on the mantel. "You're a widow with too much time to think, too much silence to fill. You're inventing drama because your life feels empty." The guilt of my suspicions ate at me. How dare I think such awful things about my own son? David, my baby boy, the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through colic and chicken pox and broken bones. The boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, who cried at his father's funeral with his head on my shoulder. The David would never hurt me. Never. I thought about all the good things. How David always called to check on me after snowstorms. How he fixed my leaky faucet last month without me even asking. How he told me he loved me at the end of every visit. Those weren't the actions of someone planning something sinister. Those were the actions of a good son. And Jessica. Well, Jessica had never been overly warm, but she wasn't cruel. She was just reserved, a bit formal. Some people are like that. Not everyone is a hugger like me. She always thanked me for dinner. She let me babysit the kids. She included me in family photos. That was enough, wasn't it? I baked an extra batch of David's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the recipe with extra vanilla that I'd perfected over 30 years. I packaged them in a tin with a cheerful ribbon and drove them over to their house unannounced. When Jessica answered the door, looking surprised and slightly annoyed, I pushed past my discomfort and hugged her. "Just wanted to do something special for my family," I said brightly. She took the cookies with a tight smile. "How thoughtful, Margaret. Thank you." I drove home feeling better, lighter. See? Everything was fine. I was just a paranoid old woman who needed to get out more, make more friends, find more hobbies. That night, I sat in Robert's armchair and whispered to his memory. "I'm being silly, aren't I, sweetheart? Imagining things. Our boy is good. Our family is solid." But even as I said the words, even as I forced myself to believe them, a tiny knot of dread remained lodged in my chest like a stone, and no amount of rationalization could make it disappear completely. I just wasn't ready yet to face what that dread was trying to tell me. 2 days after I delivered those cookies, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of my regular babysitting days. Jessica had dropped Emma and Lucas off at my house that morning, saying she had back-to-back meetings at the medical office where she worked. The kids and I had a wonderful day. We made paper airplanes, ate peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off, and watched their favorite cartoons. Around 3 o'clock, Jessica texted saying she'd be 20 minutes late picking them up. "No problem," I texted back. The kids were building a fort in the living room with couch cushions and blankets, giggling and completely content. I decided to tidy up the guest room where Jessica often left her things during visits. She'd been in such a rush that morning, she'd left her large designer purse on the bed. I picked it up to move it to the dresser, planning to set it somewhere more visible so she wouldn't forget it. That's when the folder fell out. The purse hadn't been zipped completely, and a manila folder slipped from the opening and hit the hardwood floor with a soft thud. Papers scattered across the rug. I bent down immediately, scrambling to gather them before they got out of order, muttering apologies, even though Jessica wasn't there to hear them. Then I saw the first page, and my blood turned to ice. Senior Living Communities, Premium Care Facilities in Connecticut. My hands started trembling as I picked up the next page. It was a glossy brochure showing elderly people playing cards, doing crafts, sitting in sterile-looking dining rooms with forced smiles. Meadowbrook Assisted Living, where comfort meets care. The next page was worse. Understanding Medicaid nursing home qualification, assets and income requirements. But it was the fourth page that made my heart stop completely. A professional real estate appraisal of my house. My address was printed clearly at the top, 247 Maple Ridge Drive. The document was dated 2 weeks ago. Current estimated market value, $900,000. Someone had paid a real estate appraiser to evaluate my home, without my knowledge, without my permission. My vision blurred. I sat down hard on the edge of the guest bed, the papers clutched in my shaking hands. There was more. Handwritten notes in Jessica's distinctive loopy cursive covered the margins of the appraisal. Equity available after mortgage payoff, $850K. Average monthly care facility cost, $6,000. Net profit after 5 years of care, approx $490K. Net profit. They'd calculated profit. From putting me in a home, from selling my house, from disposing of me like I was a financial burden to be eliminated. I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me. This wasn't idle curiosity. This wasn't innocent browsing. This was planning. Detailed, calculated, cold-blooded planning. There were more pages. Printouts about power of attorney regulations, information about declaring someone mentally incompetent, notes about which care facilities had availability. They were building a case, a strategy, a roadmap for removing me from my own life. From downstairs, I heard Emma call out, "Grandma, Lucas knocked over the fort." I forced air into my lungs. With trembling hands, I carefully gathered every single page and put them back in the folder in the exact order I'd found them. I placed the folder back in Jessica's purse, making sure it looked undisturbed. My mind was racing, but some survival instinct told me not to let them know I'd discovered their plan. Not yet. I walked downstairs on legs that felt like rubber. I smiled at my grandchildren and helped them rebuild their fort. I kissed their sweet faces and tickled them until they shrieked with laughter. And when Jessica arrived to pick them up, I hugged her goodbye with a smile that never reached my eyes. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I couldn't, because denial was no longer an option. The evidence was real, documented, undeniable, and I had to figure out what to do before they figured out their timeline and made their move. The following Sunday arrived like a death sentence. I'd barely eaten all week, barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those handwritten notes. Net profit. Equity available. My own home reduced to numbers on a page. My life calculated like a business transaction. But I said nothing. I cooked the pot roast. I set the table with my good china. I baked the apple pie. I played my role perfectly because I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. I needed to know if David was truly part of this or if Jessica was manipulating him. Deep down, I prayed it was all Jessica, that my son was innocent, that he'd never agree to something so cruel. That prayer died at exactly 6:15 that evening. Dinner had been tense, at least for me. I pushed food around my plate while David and Jessica chatted about their week. The kids were tired and cranky. After dessert, Emma and Lucas went to the living room to watch a movie. I excused myself to the kitchen to make coffee, grateful for a moment alone to steady my shaking hands. That's when I heard their voices drifting from the dining room. The kitchen and dining room in this old house share a ventilation system, something Robert and I discovered years ago when we could hear each other talking from different rooms. The voices carry through the vents like a whisper system. I froze, coffee pot in hand, as Jessica's voice floated clearly through the air. "David, we need to make a decision. We're drowning. The credit cards are maxed. Your business is barely breaking even. We're 3 months behind on the car payment." My son's voice heavy with stress. I know, I just don't know what to do." "I do." Jessica's voice turned sharp, calculated. "Your mom's house is worth $900,000. She's here alone getting older. She doesn't need all this space. We could put her in a nice facility. She'd be taken care of, have activities, make friends, and we could sell this place." Silence. The longest, most agonizing silence of my entire life. "Sell Mom's house?" David's voice was uncertain but not horrified, not outraged, just uncertain. "Think about it," Jessica pressed. "We pay off every debt. We save your business. We finally get ahead. She'll be fine, David. These places are nice now. It's not like the old nursing homes. And honestly, she's isolated here. This is better for everyone." My coffee pot slipped, clattering into the sink. I gripped the counter to keep from collapsing. My son. My baby. Please say no. Please tell her she's crazy. Please defend me. "You're right," David finally said, and my world shattered. "She doesn't need this much space. We could say it's for her safety. She's alone. What if she falls? What if something happens and no one's here to help?" They were building the narrative, the justification, the lie they'd tell everyone to make themselves look like caring family members instead of the thieves they were. Jessica's voice brightened. "Exactly. We're doing this for her." Something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a bone setting after being out of place. The grief transformed into something cold and sharp and furious. I wiped my eyes. I straightened my spine. I took a deep breath and walked into that dining room with the brightest smile I could manufacture. They jumped, guilty shock flashing across both their faces. "Oh," Jessica stammered. "Margaret, we were just discussing my future," I finished, my voice steady and sweet as honey. "I heard, and you know what? What a wonderful idea. I think a care home would be lovely. Thank you both for thinking of me." The shock on their faces was absolutely priceless. They'd expected resistance, tears, arguments. Instead, I'd given them exactly what they wanted, or so they thought. That afternoon, I made one phone call, and by the next morning, everything changed. Their shocked faces told me everything I needed to know, but I wasn't finished investigating. Not by a long shot. If I was going to protect myself, I needed to understand the full extent of what they'd planned. I needed to know every weapon they had, every angle they'd considered, every vulnerability they intended to exploit. That night, after they left with promises to research facilities together, I sat down at my computer. The same computer where I'd taught myself to email, to video chat with old teaching friends, to manage my finances online. They thought I was just a harmless old woman who didn't understand technology. They were wrong. I logged into my bank accounts first. Everything seemed normal at first glance. My teacher's pension deposited like clockwork. Social Security came in on schedule. Robert's life insurance payment sat untouched in savings. But then I looked closer at my credit card statements, the ones I rarely checked because I barely used credit cards anymore. My stomach dropped. Charges I didn't recognize going back 18 months. Expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Designer clothing stores I'd never heard of. A luxury hotel in Manhattan. Airline tickets to Cancun. Jewelry purchases. Electronics. Month after month after month of charges. Total amount, over $40,000. I grabbed the card from my wallet with shaking hands and called the number on the back. The automated system confirmed what I already suspected. There was an authorized user on the account, David Porter, added 6 years ago when I'd wanted to help him build his credit score when he was starting out. He'd been stealing from me for a year and a half, and I'd been too trusting, too naive to even check. But it got worse. So much worse. I opened my filing cabinet, pulling out the folder where I kept important documents, birth certificates, Robert's death certificate, insurance policies. And then I found it. A power of attorney document I'd signed 2 years ago. I remembered the day clearly now. I'd needed minor surgery, just a routine procedure to remove a benign cyst. David had insisted I sign a power of attorney, just in case something went wrong during surgery. He'd said it was standard, that everyone did it, that it would only be valid if I was unconscious or incapacitated. I'd trusted him completely. I'd signed without reading carefully, without getting my own lawyer to review it. My hands trembled as I read the fine print now. This wasn't a limited medical power of attorney. This was comprehensive. Financial decisions, medical decisions, property decisions. David could make choices on my behalf if I was deemed unable to manage my own affairs. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Jessica worked as a medical office administrator. She had connections to doctors, to medical professionals. They could arrange for a competency evaluation. They could find a doctor willing to say I was showing signs of dementia, of cognitive decline, of being unable to care for myself safely. With that evaluation and the power of attorney, they could force me into a care facility. They could sell my house. They could control everything, and it would all be legal. This wasn't a spontaneous plan born of desperation. This had been in motion for years. The power of attorney signed 2 years ago. The credit card fraud starting 18 months ago. The recent real estate appraisal. They'd been setting the stage piece by piece, preparing for the moment when they'd strike. I thought back to recent conversations, times when Jessica had commented on my forgetfulness. "Did you already tell me that story, Margaret? You mentioned that yesterday, remember?" Creating a narrative, planting seeds, building a case that I was declining mentally. David asking about my medications. whether I ever felt confused, if I had trouble sleeping. I'd thought he was being a concerned son. He was gathering ammunition. The real estate magazine wasn't idle browsing. The whispering wasn't just marital conversation. This was a systematic, calculated, long-term plan to steal my life, my home, and my independence. And I'd been blind to all of it. I sat in the darkness of my office, Robert's photo watching me from the shelf. "They underestimated me," I whispered to him. "They think I'm just a helpless old woman. But I'm not helpless, and I'm not finished." I had evidence now, documentation, a timeline, and I knew exactly who to call. After I finished documenting everything, after I'd taken photos of the credit card statements and made copies of the power of attorney, after I'd organized every piece of evidence into a neat folder, the adrenaline drained from my body like water from a broken dam. I sat in Robert's armchair, the brown leather one he'd loved so much that I could never bring myself to replace, even though the cushions were worn and the arms were cracked. I sat in the darkness with only the streetlight filtering through the curtains, and I completely fell apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, a place I didn't even know existed. They tore through my chest like physical wounds, violent and uncontrollable. I clutched Robert's old cardigan to my face, the one that still smelled faintly like his cologne even after 5 years, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. How did I get here? How did I become so disposable to my own child? The memories flooded back, each one a fresh knife to the heart. David as a newborn, so tiny and perfect in my arms, looking up at me with complete trust. I remembered the sleepless nights, walking the floors with him when he had colic, singing lullabies until my voice went hoarse. I remembered his first steps, right here in this living room, Robert and I cheering like he'd won an Olympic medal. I remembered his first day of kindergarten, how he'd cried and clung to my leg, and how I'd cried in the car afterward because my baby was growing up. The science projects we'd built together at this dining room table, the volcano that exploded all over the kitchen floor, both of us laughing covered in baking soda and vinegar. The memory of his high school graduation pierced me. Robert and I had worked double shifts for months to afford the class ring David wanted. I'd taken a second job tutoring other kids on weekends. We'd eaten ramen and canned soup so David could have new clothes for college, so he wouldn't feel less than his wealthier classmates. When he got accepted to Boston University, I'd sobbed with joy. When he couldn't afford the tuition, I'd cashed in part of my retirement fund without telling Robert. $25,000. I'd told David it was a gift, that he never needed to pay it back, that his success was all the payment I needed. His wedding day flashed through my mind, walking him down the aisle because Robert had already passed. The speech I'd given at the reception about how proud his father would have been. The $50,000 I'd given them for his business. Money Robert and I had saved for our dream vacation to Italy, a trip we never got to take because cancer stole him first. Every sacrifice, every choice, every moment I'd put David's needs before my own. And this was how he repaid me. With theft, with lies, with plans to warehouse me in some facility so he could profit from the home his father and I built with our own hands. "Robert," I sobbed into the empty room. "Robert, what do I do? Our son wants to throw me away like garbage. How did we raise someone capable of this?" The silence was crushing. Robert wasn't here to protect me, to fight for me, to tell me everything would be okay. I was alone, truly, completely alone. I thought about those care facilities in the brochures, sterile rooms that smelled like disinfectant, strangers feeding me, bathing me, telling me when to sleep and wake. Never seeing this house again, never tending Robert's roses, never sleeping in the bed where we'd loved each other for 42 years. They wanted to erase me, delete me from my own life, turn me into a line item on a balance sheet. The grief was so heavy I couldn't move. I sat in that chair until dawn broke, tears drying on my face, Robert's cardigan still pressed against my heart. My eyes were swollen, nearly shut. My throat was raw, but as the first light touched the windows, something shifted. The tears stopped. My breathing steadied, and in their place came something fierce and unbreakable: rage. The sun rose over my garden, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I was still in Robert's chair, my body stiff and aching, my eyes burning from hours of crying. I looked like hell. I felt like hell. But something fundamental had changed inside me during that long, dark night. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting, and walked to the bathroom. The woman staring back at me from the mirror looked 10 years older than she had yesterday. Red, swollen eyes, gray hair disheveled, tear-stained cheeks. But there was something else in that reflection. Something hard. Something dangerous. I turned on the shower as hot as I could stand it and stepped under the spray. As the water pounded against my shoulders, I felt the grief washing away, transforming into something sharper, something purposeful. I was done crying, done being the victim, done letting them control the narrative of my life. I thought about Robert, really thought about him. Not the sick man wasting away in that hospital bed, but the strong, fierce man who'd protected me for 42 years. The man who'd once confronted a contractor who tried to cheat us on our kitchen renovation, backing him into a corner until he refunded every penny. The man who'd taught me that kindness and strength weren't opposites, that you could be gentle and still refuse to be a doormat. Maggie, he'd said to me once when a parent at David's school had tried to bully me into changing a grade, you're the strongest person I know. Don't you ever let anyone take advantage of your good heart. Being kind doesn't mean being weak. I'd forgotten that lesson. I'd let my kindness become weakness. I'd let my love blind me to betrayal. But Robert wouldn't want me to roll over and accept this. He'd want me to fight. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I got out of the shower and dressed carefully. Not in my usual casual clothes, but in one of the nice outfits I saved for special occasions. Navy blue slacks, a crisp white blouse. The pearl earrings Robert gave me for our 20th anniversary. I dried my hair, applied makeup to cover the evidence of my breakdown, and looked in the mirror again. This time, I saw a warrior. I walked downstairs and made myself a proper breakfast for the first time in days. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and ate methodically, fueling my body for the battle ahead. As I ate, I made mental lists. I wasn't just some helpless old woman. I was Margaret Ann Porter. I had a master's degree in education. I'd taught for 40 years, which meant I knew how to research, how to plan, how to execute strategies. I'd managed a household budget through recessions and Robert's periods of unemployment. I'd raised a child, renovated a house, survived the death of my soulmate. I was 68 years old, but my mind was sharp. My will was iron. And I had something David and Jessica didn't have: righteousness. I wasn't the villain in this story. They were. And that gave me power they couldn't comprehend. I pulled out a notebook and began writing. Not emotional ramblings, but a clear, organized plan. What did I know? What did I need to find out? What were my resources? Who could help me? What were their vulnerabilities? David and Jessica thought they were so clever, planning in whispers, hiding documents, manipulating me slowly over years. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. They saw a lonely widow, a grieving mother, an easy mark. They didn't see the fighter. They didn't see the woman who'd survived loss and hardship. They didn't see someone who, when pushed into a corner, would come out swinging. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for: Patricia Chen, attorney at law. We'd been friends since college, roommates for 3 years, bridesmaid at each other's weddings. My finger hovered over her name for just a moment. Once I made this call, there was no going back. This would tear my family apart. David might never forgive me. But David had already torn us apart. He'd made his choice. Now I was making mine. I pressed the call button. Patricia answered on the second ring. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel, "I need your help. And I need you to clear your schedule. We have work to do." Patricia arrived at my house within 2 hours, her briefcase in hand and fury in her eyes. We'd been friends for 45 years, since we were roommates in college. She'd handled Robert's estate when he died. She knew my family. She knew my heart. And when I showed her everything, the credit card statements, the power of attorney, the real estate appraisal, the notes about care facilities, her lawyer face slipped, and I saw pure rage. "Those bastards," she hissed, a word I'd never heard proper, elegant Patricia use before. "Margaret, this is elder financial abuse. This is fraud. This is actionable on multiple levels." We spent the entire day at my dining room table building my counterattack, piece by careful piece. First, the power of attorney. Patricia drafted new documents immediately, revoking the one David held and creating a new one, naming her as my successor agent. We had it notarized that very afternoon by a mobile notary she trusted. David's power over me was gone, though he didn't know it yet. "But that's not enough," Patricia said, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. "They could challenge this, claim you were coerced or mentally incompetent. We need to be proactive." That's when she suggested the irrevocable trust. Within 3 days, Patricia had drafted and filed paperwork transferring my house into an irrevocable trust with me as the beneficiary and Patricia as the trustee. The house was no longer legally mine to sell, which meant David couldn't touch it even if he somehow regained power of attorney. The trust was ironclad, established by a competent attorney, and would withstand any legal challenge. But Patricia's most shocking discovery came when we examined the bank account documents. "Margaret," she said slowly, reviewing the paperwork from when David had opened his checking and savings accounts years ago. "You're listed as the primary account holder on these accounts. David is technically the secondary." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means legally the bank considers you the owner. You added him as an authorized user to help him establish banking history, remember? You have full legal access to withdraw any funds from these accounts." My mind raced. "He has about 15,000 in there, from the business, from their savings." Patricia's expression was neutral, professional. "I'm not telling you what to do, but legally, that money is yours to access. It might be useful leverage." I sat back, processing this. The account I'd helped him open when he was 23, trying to teach him financial responsibility. The account where I'd deposited that first $500 to get him started. Technically, legally mine. "Hold that thought," I said. "There's more I need to do first." Over the next week, I became a woman possessed. I contacted a private investigator Patricia recommended, a former police detective who documented everything. David's unauthorized credit card charges, the real estate appraisal done without my knowledge, the timeline of their planning. His report was thorough, professional, and damning. I called a security company and had cameras installed throughout my house, small and discreet, with audio recording capabilities. Every conversation in my home would now be documented. I started keeping a detailed journal, logging every interaction with David and Jessica, every phone call, every comment they made about my memory or my capability. I was building a paper trail they couldn't dispute. I contacted my credit card company and filed formal fraud reports on David's unauthorized charges. They launched an investigation immediately. The credit card fraud unit took this seriously. $40,000 was substantial theft. Most importantly, I scheduled a complete medical evaluation with my doctor, Dr. Sarah Patel, who'd been treating me for 15 years. I explained the situation. She was horrified. "Margaret, you're one of the sharpest patients I have," she said. "Your cognitive function is excellent. I'll document everything." She ran a full cognitive assessment, memory tests, problem-solving exercises, mental status examinations. I scored in the 95th percentile for my age group. She provided detailed written documentation that I was in perfect mental health, fully capable of managing my own affairs, with no signs of dementia or cognitive decline whatsoever. Patricia added it to our growing file. "They wanted to paint you as incompetent." Patricia said, organizing the documents. "Instead, we have medical proof you're sharp as a tack. They wanted to take your house. Now it's in an irrevocable trust. They wanted financial control. Now that power of attorney is void. Margaret, you've built a fortress they can't breach." I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator. "Good," I said, "because now comes the fun part." 2 weeks after my conversation with Patricia, David called. His voice was falsely cheerful, artificially bright. "Mom, Jessica and I have been doing some research on those senior communities we discussed. We'd love to come over this Sunday and show you what we found. We think you're really going to be excited about the options." Excited. About being removed from my home and warehoused like outdated furniture. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, injecting trembling eagerness into my voice. "I've been thinking so much about what you said. You're right that this house is too big for me. I get lonely here." I could practically hear his relief through the phone. He'd expected resistance. Instead, I was giving him exactly what he wanted, or so he thought. Sunday arrived with cruel sunshine. I played my role to perfection. I wore my oldest cardigan, the one with the frayed cuffs. I left my hair slightly messy. I moved a bit slower, shuffled my feet slightly. I was painting a picture of a declining old woman who needed help, who couldn't possibly manage on her own. David and Jessica arrived with glossy brochures and rehearsed presentations. They'd clearly practiced this. They sat on either side of me on the couch, their voices syrupy with false concern. "This one has a beautiful garden, Mom," Jessica cooed, showing me photos of Meadowbrook Senior Living. "You could grow roses just like Dad's roses, and there are activities every day. Bingo, crafts, movie nights. You'd make so many friends." David squeezed my hand. "We just want what's best for you. We worry about you being alone. What if you fell? What if something happened and nobody was here?" I let my eyes water. "You're such good children. So thoughtful. When would this happen?" They exchanged a quick glance. Jessica's eyes gleamed. "Well, we've already spoken to a real estate agent. We could list the house in 2 weeks. You could move into Meadowbrook by the end of the month. Everything would happen very quickly, very smoothly." Very quickly. Before I had time to think. Before I could consult a lawyer. Before anyone could interfere with their plan. I nodded slowly, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. Then I said the words that would seal their fate. "Before we do this, I'd like to gather the whole family. Your Aunt Linda, your cousins, the Hendersons from next door who've known you since you were in diapers. I want everyone to understand this decision and support it. Let's have a proper farewell party here this Saturday. One last gathering in the house where you grew up." I watched David hesitate. This wasn't part of their plan, but Jessica jumped in quickly. "What a beautiful idea, Margaret. A farewell party. We can help you say goodbye properly." She wanted witnesses. She wanted people to see me agreeing to this voluntarily. She wanted the appearance of family unity. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. "Perfect," I said with a trembling smile. "I'll make all the arrangements." The moment they left, I called Patricia. Then I called my sister Linda. Then I called neighbors, friends from church, my old teaching colleagues. And most importantly, I called Officer James Martinez and Officer Kate Chen, 2 police officers from my church who'd known David since he was a boy. "I need witnesses," I told Patricia. "I need people who've known me for decades to see what's really happening." Over the next 6 days, I prepared like a general preparing for battle. I tested the security cameras. I backed up all the footage to the cloud. Patricia prepared document packets for key attendees. The private investigator gave me a thumb drive with his complete report. Saturday morning arrived. People began filling my living room. 40 friends, family members, and neighbors. David and Jessica arrived early, dressed beautifully, smiling confidently. They had no idea the trap had already closed around them. They just didn't know it yet. I looked around at all the faces, some curious, some concerned, all waiting to understand why they'd been called here. It was time to burn their world down. My living room was packed. Aunt Linda sat on the couch with my cousins. The Hendersons, my neighbors for 30 years, stood near the window. Patricia positioned herself strategically by the TV. Officers Martinez and Chen stood quietly in the back, in plain clothes as I'd requested. David and Jessica didn't even notice them. David stood up, clearing his throat. He'd prepared a speech. "Thank you all for coming today. This is a difficult but important family decision. As many of you know, Mom has been struggling living alone in this big house since Dad passed. We found a wonderful senior living community where she'll be safe, cared for, and have constant companionship." Heads nodded. Some people looked at me with sympathy. Poor Margaret, so sad to leave her home, but probably for the best. Jessica stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of unity. "It's really a beautiful facility. Margaret will have her own apartment, 3 meals a day, activities, medical care on site. We've thought very carefully about what's best for her. And," David continued, his voice catching with false emotion, "we'll be handling the sale of the house. It's too much for Mom to manage. We want to make this transition as easy as possible for her." The room was silent, waiting for my response, waiting for the confused old woman to tearfully agree. I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the armrest. Then I looked directly at David, and my voice was clear, strong, and cold as winter. "Before we continue, I need to show everyone something." I nodded to Patricia, who turned on the television. My security camera footage began to play, crystal clear with perfect audio. The room watched in growing shock as Jessica's whisper filled the speakers. "David, your mom's house is worth $900,000. We're drowning in credit card debt and the business is failing. She's here alone, getting older. Let's put her in a home. We sell this place, pay off everything, and finally have the life we deserve." David's voice followed. "You're right. She doesn't need this much space. We could say it's for her safety." The room erupted in gasps. Aunt Linda's hand flew to her mouth. Mrs. Henderson's face went red with fury. David and Jessica stood frozen, the color draining from their faces like water down a drain. "Wait," David started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." Patricia handed me a document packet. I held up the credit card statements, my hands perfectly steady now. "For the past 18 months, my son has been using my credit card without my permission. $40,000 in fraudulent charges. Vacations, jewelry, designer clothes, all while he told me his business was thriving." I displayed the real estate appraisal next. This is an appraisal of my home that they commissioned without my knowledge. Note Jessica's handwritten calculations in the margin. Net profit after 5 years. They weren't thinking about my well-being. They were calculating their return on investment. The room was dead silent except for someone's shocked crying. I couldn't tell who. Patricia stepped forward, her lawyer voice filling the room. "My name is Patricia Chen. I'm Margaret's attorney and her friend of 45 years. What we've just witnessed is attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Margaret has filed formal fraud charges with the police regarding the credit card theft." Officers Martinez and Chen stepped forward then, their badges now visible. David's face went from pale to gray. Jessica started crying, her perfect makeup running in black streaks. "But wait," I said, my voice cutting through Jessica's sobs. "There's one more thing you all should know." I pulled out my phone and showed them my banking app. "Remember those bank accounts I helped you open, David? The ones where I was listed as the primary account holder to help you establish credit." David's eyes went wide with sudden understanding and horror. "I made a phone call 2 days ago. I withdrew every penny from those accounts, $15,000. Because legally, as the primary account holder, those funds belong to me." The room exploded. Aunt Linda was shouting at David. Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted to throw David out physically. My church friends were crying. Cousins were demanding explanations. Jessica collapsed onto the couch, sobbing hysterically. David just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, no words coming out. "Your accounts are empty?" I said quietly. just loud enough for him to hear. Just like my heart when I heard you plotting to throw me away. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours, David and Jessica received a formal letter from Patricia's law firm. The terms were non-negotiable. They would repay the $40,000 in stolen credit card charges, plus the $50,000 I'd given David for his business. They would sign legally binding documents, relinquishing any and all claims to my estate, now or in the future. They would maintain a distance of no less than 500 feet from my property unless explicitly invited, and they would complete these terms within 90 days or face criminal prosecution for elder fraud and financial exploitation. David called me once, his voice broken. "Mom, please, we'll lose everything. The house, the business, everything." "You were willing to take everything from me," I said quietly. "Consider this a lesson in consequences." I hung up. It was the last time we spoke for 6 months. The criminal charges I'd filed moved forward. The credit card company's fraud investigation confirmed systematic theft. David was forced to enter a plea agreement, repayment in full, probation, and mandatory counseling for financial crimes. No jail time, but a permanent record. His business, already drowning in debt, collapsed completely. They had to sell their house to pay me back. Jessica's medical office fired her when word spread. Small-town gossip moves fast, and nobody wanted to work with someone who'd plotted to institutionalize her mother-in-law for profit. The money they returned, $90,000 total, I put into a trust fund for Emma and Lucas. My grandchildren were innocent in all this. They didn't choose their parents' greed. The grandchildren were the hardest part. David and Jessica tried to keep them from me at first, using them as weapons, as leverage, but Patricia intervened. After 3 months of negotiation and one very uncomfortable family court mediation, we established supervised visitation. Every other Saturday, Emma and Lucas would spend the afternoon with me, with a court-appointed supervisor present initially. The first visit, Emma asked, "Grandma, why don't we see you anymore?" I knelt down, looking into her innocent 7-year-old eyes. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and need time to fix things, but I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. Nothing will ever change that." Lucas, only 5, just hugged me tight. That hug sustained me through months of healing. Eventually, as I proved myself consistent and loving, and as David and Jessica completed their court-mandated counseling, the supervision was dropped. The kids came every Saturday. We baked cookies, tended the garden, read books. I never spoke badly about their parents to them. That wasn't their burden to carry. David sent me a letter on my 69th birthday. It was 3 pages of apologies, explanations, and what seemed like genuine remorse. "I lost myself," he wrote. "I let financial stress and Jessica's influence turn me into someone I don't recognize. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry." I wrote back. 1 line. "Sorry doesn't erase betrayal, but it's a start. Focus on being a better father than you were a son." We weren't reconciled. Maybe we never would be. But the sharp edge of my rage had dulled into something more like acceptance. My house remained mine, protected in its irrevocable trust. I updated my will, leaving everything to Emma and Lucas in trust, with Patricia as executor. David would never control a penny of it. I joined a community center for active seniors and made real friends. Martha, a widow like me, became my Tuesday lunch companion. We took a watercolor painting class together. I discovered I loved painting landscapes. I traveled, something I'd always dreamed of but never done. I took a trip to Italy, the vacation Robert and I had planned, before cancer stole him. I walked the streets of Rome and Florence, and I felt Robert walking beside me. "We made it, love," I whispered. "Not the way we planned, but we made it." I stood in my garden one crisp October morning, tending to Robert's roses. They were blooming beautifully, deep red and fragrant. The house behind me stood solid and safe. Protected mine. I was 69 years old, alone but not lonely, betrayed but not broken. I had protected myself. I had defended my dignity. I had reclaimed my life. And for the first time in months, I felt something that had been absent since that terrible Sunday when I'd overheard their whispered conspiracy. Peace. 1 year later, I stood at my kitchen window on a Sunday morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The coffee maker burbled behind me, filling the house with its familiar aroma. Robert's chair sat in its usual place in the living room, worn but cherished. The house was quiet, peaceful mine. I walked outside to the garden, my bare feet touching the cool grass, and knelt beside the roses Robert had planted so many years ago. They were thriving, more beautiful than ever, as if fed by my newfound strength. I touched the soft petals and felt Robert's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. "I did it, my love," I whispered to the morning air. "I protected what we built. I protected myself." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and I chose to believe it was his answer, his approval, his pride. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trusting to the point of blindness, generous to the point of vulnerability, kind to the point of being a target. That woman had believed that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water, that love meant never setting boundaries. That woman had nearly lost everything. The woman I was now understood something deeper. Love without respect is exploitation. Kindness without boundaries is weakness. And family is not defined by blood, but by who shows up when it matters, who protects rather than predates, who lifts up rather than tears down. I learned that being elderly doesn't mean being disposable, that reaching your golden years doesn't make you less valuable, less deserving of dignity, less worthy of respect. Society sometimes treats the elderly as burdens, as obstacles, as assets to be liquidated. But we are human beings with lifetimes of wisdom, experience, and earned peace. We deserve to live our final chapters on our own terms. I learned that greed is a poison that can corrupt even the most sacred relationships. It can turn a son against his mother, a wife against her mother-in-law, family into adversaries. Money has the power to reveal people's true character, and sometimes what it reveals is ugly beyond imagination. But most importantly, I learned this. You are never too old to fight back, never too trusting to become strategic, never too kind to develop a backbone, never too hurt to protect yourself. Age is not weakness, experience is power. And underestimating someone because they're elderly, because they're grieving, because they're generous, that's the mistake predators make right before they lose everything. I didn't just survive my son's betrayal, I defeated it. I turned their weapons against them. I protected my home, my assets, my dignity, and my peace. And in doing so, I taught them a lesson they'll never forget. You cannot steal from someone who knows their worth and refuses to be a victim. Standing in my garden now, financially secure, legally protected, surrounded by true friends and genuine love from my grandchildren, I feel something I never thought I'd feel again after that terrible day I overheard their whispered plot, victory. Now I want to hear from you, wherever you're watching from around the world. If you were in my position, if you overheard your own child plotting to institutionalize you for money, what would you have done? Would you have fought back like I did? Would you have forgiven them? Would you have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, your perspectives, your wisdom. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how we treat our elderly family members, if it reminded you that age doesn't equal helplessness, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Maybe it's someone being taken advantage of. Maybe it's someone who needs to remember their own strength. Maybe it's someone who needs to understand that our elderly deserve respect, not exploitation. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories about courage, betrayal, justice, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Stories that remind us that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, that kindness should have boundaries, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. Remember this: being kind doesn't mean being weak. Being generous doesn't mean being stupid. Being elderly doesn't mean being helpless. You have the right to protect yourself, your assets, and your peace. You have the right to set boundaries even with family. You have the right to fight back when someone tries to exploit your love. Never let anyone make you feel disposable. Never let anyone convince you that you're too old, too trusting, or too kind to defend yourself. Your life matters. Your home matters. Your dignity matters. And you have every right to protect all of it with everything you have. Thank you for watching my story. Until next time, protect your peace, know your worth, and never apologize for refusing to be a victim. You are stronger than they think. And that strength might just be the thing that saves your life.